December wind in Alaska doesn't ask permission. It finds the gaps in walls, the seams in boards, the places where human effort gave up years ago and wood surrendered to time. Marcus Hayes stood in the center of what the listing had called a seasonal structure and understood for the first time in his 39 years what it meant to own nothing that mattered. The roof on the east side had buckled under 3 feet of accumulated snow. A crack ran along the ridge beam like a fault line waiting to split. 2 windows were gone entirely, replaced with weathered plywood someone had nailed up and never returned to finish. The floor was pine planks laid over bare earth, and the earth had frozen so hard it rang when Marcus knocked his boot heel against it. A wood stove sat in the corner, rusted shut, its pipe disconnected and lying on its side like a piece of failed machinery. Against the back wall someone had left a wooden chair with one leg shorter than the others. That was the inventory. That was what $400 a month bought when a man had lost his job, his wife, and the right to live in the house he'd helped pay for over 11 years. Marcus set down his duffel bag, the same gray canvas he'd used for fishing trips before Connor was born, before the marriage, before any of this. He looked at the interior of his new life. The last light of the December afternoon came in pale and flat through the gaps in the plywood, and outside Anchorage was doing what it always did in midwinter, pressing down, compressing the world to a gray strip between snowfall and darkness. Copper made a sound, not a bark, something quieter, a low, questioning note from the back of his throat. He was a medium-sized dog of uncertain ancestry, built like a working animal but soft-eyed, with a dark brindle coat that had gone slightly gray at the muzzle. 7 years old. He'd been Marcus's dog before he became a family dog, and when Jennifer packed the Honda and drove north to her mother's place, then back to start over with Ryan Foster, she'd left Copper behind. Whether that was mercy or oversight, Marcus had stopped trying to decide. The dog crossed the room and sat beside Marcus, waiting for instruction that didn't come. Marcus crouched by the wood stove. The rust wasn't as bad as it looked, surface corrosion, not structural rot. He found the elbow joint of the stovepipe and tried to fit it back into the collar with the heel of his hand. It didn't hold. He pushed harder. The metal groaned but didn't seat. Marcus opened the firebox door. It screamed on its hinges. Inside was old ash, a desiccated mouse nest, 4 inches of compacted debris that smelled like abandonment. He could work with that. He'd stopped at a gas station on the highway and filled a canvas bag with firewood from their stack out back. Birch, mostly, already split and dry. He built the fire the way his father had shown him once 20 years ago, the summer before the scaffolding gave way on the Fairbanks Hospital project, and dropped James Hayes 40 feet onto rebar. Crumpled newspaper at the center. Kindling in a careful tent. 2 small birch rounds laid parallel to let air through. When Marcus lit the match, his hands shook badly enough that he went through 3 before the paper caught. The stove drew unevenly at first, sending smoke back into the room, and Marcus opened the front door to create a draft. Cold poured in around his legs like water finding its level. Copper stood in the doorway and watched the snow. It was falling again, coming down fine and steady in the darkening air, settling on the porch boards without sound. When the fire finally took and the smoke began pulling up instead of out, Marcus closed the door. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall. Not the chair. The chair didn't feel trustworthy. He listened to the stove pop and tick as the metal expanded. Copper lay down with his chin on Marcus's knee. Outside, the wind found the eaves and sang through them in long, low registers that had no emotion in them. Not mournful, not menacing. Just wind doing what wind does when there's nothing in its way. Marcus thought about the afternoon 6 weeks ago when Jennifer told him. Not in anger. That almost would have been easier. In a kind of flat certainty, like someone reading from a document they'd prepared in advance. She'd met Ryan at a conference in Fairbanks the previous spring. An architect, 5 years younger than Marcus, with a clean-shaven face and a way of listening that made people feel heard. She'd been seeing him since June. She was sorry. She said it exactly once, in those exact words, and then moved through the rest of the conversation as though sorrow were a formality they both needed to observe before getting to practical matters. The practical matters. She would take the children. Connor was 13, old enough to have opinions, and his opinion was that he wanted to stay with his mother, that he was angry at his father for reasons he could not or would not articulate clearly. Emma was 8. Emma had cried and held Marcus's hand and said she didn't want 2 houses, and Jennifer had stood in the doorway of Emma's room and waited for the scene to conclude. Marcus had not contested the custody arrangement. He had not had the resources, emotional or financial, to stand in a courtroom and argue for a different future than the one Jennifer had already drawn up. He'd signed where the attorney told him to sign. He'd moved out of the house on the east side of Anchorage, the one they'd bought when Connor was 2, and spent 3 weeks on a friend's couch while he looked for a place he could afford. What he could afford turned out to be this. He'd found it through a property management company that dealt in distressed rural holdings. 2 acres outside the city, a shelter structure. No utilities currently connected but a power pole on the property. The rental rate was low enough to seem like a misprint. Marcus had not fully understood what he was agreeing to until he arrived with his duffel bag and his dog and saw the structure for what it was. The last option available to a man who'd run through all the others. Now he sat on the frozen floor with Copper's head on his knee and a fire that was not yet warm enough to matter, and he did not feel sorry for himself. He was too cold for that, too tired, too aware that self-pity in an uninsulated structure in December was a thing that could kill you if you let it run long enough. He thought about his father instead. James Hayes had grown up in rural Montana. He'd built a workshop addition onto the family house by himself over 2 summers. He'd said things like measure twice and don't start what you can't finish and the work is the answer. He'd died of blunt force trauma and internal bleeding at 61, before Connor was born, before any of this, on a job site where someone forgot to check the scaffolding welds. In the duffel bag, underneath Marcus's clothes and a paperback novel he hadn't opened, was his father's toolbox, a metal craftsman box, dented and repainted twice, with a combination lock Marcus had memorized when he was 9. When he'd cleared out his father's things from the rental storage unit after the funeral, it was the one item he'd taken without asking anyone's permission. He looked at the toolbox across the room in the growing firelight. His father's handwriting was still visible on the masking tape label stuck to the lid. J. Hayes. Personal. The work is the answer. Marcus didn't get up that night. He was too cold, and the fire needed managing, and his body had made the decision to stay on the floor before his mind weighed in. But he looked at the toolbox. He looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something when you're trying to decide if you still believe what it represents. The cold got worse before it got better. In the second week of December, a system came down from the north and parked over south-central Alaska for 4 days. Temperatures dropped to -22. The power company connected the pole on the second day. Marcus had arranged that before he moved in, but he ran only a single space heater and the lights, keeping the bill manageable, because heating the structure in its current state was like heating the outdoors with extra steps. He slept in his coat. He slept with Copper pressed against his back, the dog's body heat the only reliable warmth in the room. During the day, Marcus worked. He started with the roof on the east side. He found 2x4s in a stack behind the structure. Old lumber that had been cut and abandoned, some of it rotted at the ends but most of it sound through the middle. He recut the bad sections. He climbed onto the roof in the morning before the temperature dropped further and replaced the cracked ridge beam section with a splice and 3 lag bolts. It took him most of the day. His hands were in gloves, which meant he could feel the tools but couldn't feel much else. And when he came down near dark, he found that the skin on both thumbs had cracked open at the knuckles in the dry cold. He taped them with medical tape from the first aid kit and went back up the next morning. The roof project took 4 days. When it was done, when the east slope held its snow instead of sagging under it, Marcus stood at the base of the ladder and looked up at what he'd accomplished. It wasn't beautiful. The splice was visible and the new board was a slightly different color than the old ones, but it was solid. He bounced his weight on the ladder and felt nothing flex that shouldn't. That mattered. He held on to that. The toolbox had yielded things Marcus had forgotten. A hand plane, 3 levels, a good tape measure, a set of chisels his father had kept sharp with a fine grit stone that was still in the box, wrapped in an oiled cloth. Working with his father's tools had an unexpected quality. Not grief exactly, but a kind of conversation, as though doing the same work with the same instruments put Marcus briefly in the same place his father had occupied. He wasn't sentimental about it. He just noticed it the way you notice when light changes. Marcus replaced the 2 missing windows with glazed units he bought at a building supply store in Anchorage. That cost money he didn't have easily, but the alternative was 2 open holes in the wall through the winter, and the alternative wasn't actually an alternative. He cut and shimmed the frames himself. The first one went in cleanly. The second one bound in the rough opening, and Marcus spent 2 hours with a plane before it fit. When he sealed the second window and the draft stopped, the interior temperature rose by 6 degrees in an hour. Marcus stood there feeling those 6 degrees. Copper was watching him from across the room with the particular attention dogs give to things they don't fully understand but have decided are significant. Marcus looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. 6 degrees was 6 degrees. He saw Jennifer once, by accident, in a parking lot. She was coming out of the grocery store on Muldoon Road and Marcus was going in, and they nearly walked into each other between the automatic doors. She was carrying 2 bags and wearing a green coat Marcus didn't recognize. She looked well, not happy, not unhappy, steady, the way a person looks when they've made a decision and stopped revisiting it. The words came out before Marcus could edit them. "How are the kids?" Jennifer shifted the bags in her arms, a small adjustment that bought her a second to compose her face into something neutral. "They're good. Connor made the basketball team. Emma's doing well in school." Marcus nodded. He noticed she'd cut her hair shorter. He noticed she was wearing different earrings than she used to wear, small gold studs instead of the silver loops she'd had for years. Small alterations, the accumulation of a new life assembling itself from small changes. "They have a thing at school next week," Jennifer said, her voice careful, measured. "The winter concert. They'd like you there." "I'll be there." She nodded. She looked at him with an expression Marcus couldn't decode, something between assessment and something older that he didn't want to name. "Are you okay?" she said, and the question landed with more weight than she probably intended. Marcus thought about the honest answer. He thought about -22 and the cracked thumbs and sleeping in a coat and the way the wind found new routes into the structure every time he sealed an old one. He thought about the legal pad on which he'd written, in his own handwriting, a list of everything broken about the place he was living, and how the list had been getting shorter line by line because he was making it shorter. "Working on it," he said. She nodded again and they went their separate ways without touching, without any of the small gestures that used to punctuate their interactions. Marcus sat in his truck in the parking lot afterward, hands on the wheel, engine not yet running. Not because he was overcome, he was past the part where unexpected encounters could undo him, but because there was a kind of accounting that needed doing, a quiet taking stock of where he was and what he still needed. He was 39 years old. He had a structure with a sound roof and a sealed floor and 2 new windows. He had his father's tools and an improving understanding of how to use them. He had a dog and a list that was getting shorter. He had a son who wouldn't look at him clearly, and a daughter who looked at him like he was the fixed point she was navigating by. Marcus started the truck and drove back toward the property. The road out of the city ran north through a corridor of spruce, and the trees were heavy with new snowfall, and in the headlights the road looked like a tunnel through a white world, narrow and certain, going somewhere. The winter concert was in a gymnasium decorated with paper snowflakes cut by children who still believed in the aesthetic value of symmetry. Marcus stood at the back because he'd arrived late and all the seats were taken. He spotted Connor in the second row of risers, tall for his age now, with Jennifer's coloring, standing slightly apart from the other kids in the way of someone practicing a kind of separateness. Emma was in the front row of the younger group, small and serious in a red sweater, scanning the audience with the systematic attention of a person conducting a search. When she found Marcus, her face broke open entirely. She didn't wave. They were already singing, some version of a winter song Marcus didn't know. But she watched him through the whole performance with that particular quality of attention children have when they're making sure something is real, making sure the person is actually there. Afterward, in the hallway, Emma ran at Marcus and he caught her, lifting her off the ground in one motion. "You came," she said, muffled against his shoulder. "Said I would." He held her with the awareness he always had now of how quickly she was growing, how her arms were longer than they'd been at Christmas, how her voice was beginning to lose the pure roundness of early childhood. He held her with that awareness and did not say anything about it. Connor appeared at the edge of the hallway, hands in the pockets of a jacket that was slightly too large for him, borrowed or handed down. He looked at his father with an expression that was working hard to be neutral, to not give anything away. "Hey, bud." "Hey." A pause. Connor's eyes moved over Marcus's face, taking inventory of something. "You look tired." "I'm okay." Connor looked at Emma, then back at Marcus, then at the floor. Some calculation was happening that Marcus couldn't see the inside of. "Whatever," Connor said, not with cruelty, with something more like confusion. The word doing service for feelings that didn't yet have names. He turned and went back toward the gymnasium where Jennifer was waiting with Ryan Foster, the man who was learning how to be present in Connor's life in ways Marcus had failed to master. Emma watched Connor go. She looked up at Marcus with an expression that was older than 8, that had figured out something it shouldn't have needed to figure out yet. "He's not really mad at you," she said quietly. "I know." "He's scared." Marcus looked down at his daughter. She was 8 years old, and she had solved a problem that had taken Marcus considerably longer to understand. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." She nodded as if this were satisfactory, and held his hand until Jennifer appeared at the end of the hallway and Emma let go, the small fingers slipping away without drama, without resistance, just the natural conclusion of a moment that had run its course. She appeared on Marcus's porch on a Tuesday in mid-December. Marcus heard the creak of boards and opened the door to find someone he didn't know standing on the steps with a cast-iron pot, a folded wool blanket, and an armload of split birch balanced with the practiced competence of someone who'd been carrying useful things to other people for decades. The person was not who Marcus expected. Samuel Brennan was 72 years old, white, with close-cropped gray hair, and a face that had lived outdoors for most of its life and made peace with that fact. He had the posture of someone who'd spent time in the military, spine straight, shoulders square, economy of movement. "Sam Brennan," he said, his voice carrying the flat vowels of the upper Midwest. "2 properties north, seen the lights on." Marcus moved aside and Sam came in without waiting for explicit permission. He set the pot on the wood stove, unfolded the blanket and laid it over the back of the uneven chair, and stacked the birch beside the stove with the easy efficiency of someone whose motions had been refined by repetition over years. Copper approached with his nose working. Sam held out his hand for the dog to smell, then scratched behind Copper's ear with the confidence of someone who understood canine social protocols. "Good dog," he said with the same certainty he'd applied to everything else. Marcus stood in his own space, feeling like a guest. "I made potato soup," Sam said, gesturing to the pot. "It'll keep you warm tonight. Anyway." He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room and looked at the structure with the assessing eye of someone who knew how buildings were supposed to work and could see all the ways this one didn't. Whatever conclusion he reached, he kept it to himself for the moment. "You do the roof work?" "Yeah. Saw you up there last week. Thought about coming over but figured I'd wait. See if you stuck." Marcus absorbed that. The idea that his neighbor had been watching, evaluating, deciding whether Marcus was worth the investment of time and soup and firewood. "I'm sticking," Marcus said, and realized as he said it that it was true, that some decision had been made in the days of working alone in the cold, some commitment that hadn't required conscious thought to become binding. Sam nodded. He pulled a thermos from his coat pocket and unscrewed the cap. "Coffee?" They sat, Sam in the uneven chair, which he settled into as though he'd been sitting in that exact chair his whole life, and Marcus on the floor, and drank coffee that was strong enough to taste like a decision. Sam talked about the property mostly, the history of the structure. It had been a hunting camp in the 70s, a seasonal rental in the 80s, abandoned since the late 90s when the owner died and the estate got complicated. "The bones are good," Sam said, looking at the roofline Marcus had repaired. "It was built honestly, just been left too long." Marcus looked at the ceiling, at the place where he'd spliced the ridge beam. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness. It's what I can see." Sam looked at Marcus with eyes that had seen a lot of young men in various states of disrepair and knew how to measure what was recoverable. "The house won't save you from anything," Sam said. "That's not what it does. You save the house." Marcus wasn't sure in the moment whether Sam meant that literally or as some kind of metaphor. Later he decided it was both. When Sam left, Marcus sat with the soup warming on the stove and the extra wood stacked in reach and the wool blanket across his lap, and something in him that had been held rigid for weeks loosened slightly. Not all the way, not anywhere near all the way, but slightly. He let it. Marcus developed a routine, which was the closest thing to sanity he could construct. He woke at 6 when the fire had usually burned to coals and rebuilt it. He ate breakfast while the room warmed, oatmeal, coffee, whatever he'd managed to assemble. He worked from 7 until dark, with a break at midday. He kept the list on the yellow legal pad of what needed doing in rough order of urgency, and he crossed things off when they were done. The list was long. Marcus did not look at the bottom of it. He insulated the floor first because the frozen earth beneath the planks was drawing warmth down as efficiently as any open window. He pulled up half the flooring, careful work, preserving the boards, and laid rigid foam insulation between the joists, then put the planks back down. The difference was immediate. The floor stopped being something to endure and became something close to neutral. Then he insulated the walls. The exterior was board and batten, old but sound. The interior had never been finished, just exposed framing and the back of the exterior boards. Marcus bought bats of fiberglass insulation from the same building supply store and spent 3 days fitting them between studs, wearing a dust mask and long sleeves, stapling vapor barrier, then sheathing the interior walls with plywood panels he'd found in a salvage yard outside the city. It wasn't drywall. It wasn't finished. But it was a wall, and it held heat, and that was the job. He fixed the stovepipe connection properly, new high-temperature caulk around the collar, a new section of 6-inch pipe to replace the one that had rusted through at the elbow. Sam came by while Marcus was doing it and watched from the doorway. "You've done this before," Sam said. "Never." Sam made a sound that might have been approval. "Looks like you have." It didn't look like Marcus had done it before. Marcus knew it didn't, but he appreciated the lie. His hands got stronger. The cracks on his knuckles stopped opening every morning and started to heal, the skin toughening into something more resilient. Marcus developed a competency with the tools that surprised him. He had always been adequate with his hands, capable of basic repairs. But this was different. This was daily, demanding, cumulative. He began to understand the structure the way you understand something you've been listening to carefully for a long time, where it was strong, where it was just pretending. He fixed the pretending parts. Marcus found that working with his hands did something to time. The days that had felt formless and uncontained after the separation, when time had a quality of pooling and spreading with nowhere to go, acquired shape from the work. 7 o'clock, roof joists. 9 o'clock, wall insulation. Noon, eat something, rest, look at the legal pad. 1 o'clock, start again. By the end of each day there was always something that had not been there at the beginning. some small, corrected wrong. And the accumulation of small, corrected wrongs was beginning to add up to something Marcus didn't have a name for yet, but could feel taking form in the same way you can feel weather change before the first drop of rain. Some evenings, when the light was gone and the work was done, Marcus sat with Copper and thought about Connor, about the particular anger of a 13-year-old who doesn't have the vocabulary for what he's feeling and so deploys whatever is available. Marcus had been that boy once. He'd sat in a pickup truck beside his father in a silence that was not comfortable and had wanted to say something about fear, about confusion, about the dull ache of watching adults fail each other, and had not been able to find the words. So he'd said nothing for years. Marcus was not going to make Connor wait years. He wrote his son a letter. Not a long one. Marcus was not good at long letters, but an honest one. He said that he was sorry for whatever Connor was feeling that didn't have a name yet. He said that he was not going anywhere. He said that if Connor ever wanted to come see what Marcus was working on, Marcus would teach him everything he'd learned, which had been considerable in the past 6 weeks. He sealed the letter and gave it to Emma at their next scheduled visit, because he didn't have Connor's cell number, and asking Jennifer felt like asking for a favor Marcus hadn't earned yet. He didn't know if Connor read it. He sent it anyway. There was a freedom in that, in sending a thing without knowing if it arrived, without waiting for confirmation. Marcus had spent a long time trying to manage outcomes, to engineer results, to be present in exactly the way that would produce exactly the response he needed. That was over. The letter was sent. The roof was repaired. The walls were insulated. These things were true regardless of what anyone else did with the information. On the third night of the cold snap, when the temperature outside hit -24 and the space heater struggled to keep the interior above freezing, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at the screen. Emma. Mom says you live in a broken shack. Are you okay, Daddy? Marcus sat on the floor with his back against the newly insulated wall and looked at the message for a long time. He looked at the structure around him, the repaired roof, the sealed windows, the insulated floor and walls that were starting to hold heat the way they were supposed to. He looked at Copper sleeping near the stove. He looked at his father's toolbox in the corner, the tools laid out on the workbench Marcus had built from salvaged lumber. He typed back, I'm fixing it up. You'll see. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Emma. Promise? Marcus. Promise. He set the phone down and sat in the quiet of the structure, listening to the wind outside and the fire inside and the small sounds of a building settling into itself. He thought about the promise he'd just made, about what it would require of him to keep it, about whether he had it in him to deliver something worthy of his daughter's belief. The work is the answer, his father had said. Marcus picked up the legal pad and looked at the list. 32 items. 11 crossed off, 21 remaining. He added a new one at the bottom. Make Emma's room. Then he set the pad aside, fed another log into the stove, and lay down on the floor with the wool blanket Sam had brought, and Copper's warmth against his back. Outside the temperature kept dropping, but inside the structure was holding. The walls Marcus had built were doing their job. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Sam returned 3 days later with a tool belt slung over his shoulder and a thermos of coffee that suggested he planned to stay a while. Marcus was outside attempting to re-level the porch steps, which had settled unevenly into the frozen ground. He'd been at it for an hour with minimal progress and maximum frustration. Sam watched for maybe 30 seconds before he spoke. You're fighting the frost heave. Ground's still moving under there, won't settle until spring. Marcus straightened, his back protesting the motion. So, what do I do? Build it knowing it'll shift. Use shims you can adjust. Don't anchor it permanent until May. Sam set down his tool belt and knelt beside the steps, his joints making small sounds of complaint that he ignored. He showed Marcus how to cut pressure-treated shims at angles that would allow for seasonal adjustment, how to check level in 2 directions, how to build something temporary that would function as though it were permanent. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. Sam's hands moved with the economy of someone who'd done this exact task 100 times in various configurations, and Marcus found himself watching the older man's technique more than focusing on his own work. "You built your place yourself?" Marcus asked, positioning a shim where Sam indicated. "78. Took me 2 summers. Had help from some buddies, but most of it was just me and a lot of mistakes I learned from." Sam adjusted the shim a fraction of an inch, checked the level again, nodded. "Before that I built fire base bunkers outside Da Nang, infantry engineering. We'd dig fighting positions in red clay that turned to soup when it rained, shore them up with sandbags and corrugated tin, and hope they'd last through the next mortar attack." He said it without drama, the way someone might describe a previous job in retail or food service. Marcus had known Sam was a veteran. The haircut and bearing made that obvious. But the specificity of the disclosure felt like an invitation into something. "How long were you there?" 13 months. Came home in 71. Took me another 7 years to figure out what to do with being home." Sam stood, testing the step with his weight. It held level. "Building my house was part of that figuring. Turns out working with your hands has a way of settling things that won't settle any other way." He looked at Marcus with an expression that was measuring something beyond carpentry skills. "Your father teach you any of this?" "He died before he could. Construction accident. I was 19. Sam's face shifted almost imperceptibly, a small recognition passing through his eyes. "Then I'll teach you, if you're serious about fixing this place." "I'm serious." "Good. We start with the roof. The repair you did is solid enough for now, but come spring thaw, you're going to need to address the whole structure, or you'll be doing it again next winter." Over the next 3 weeks, Sam appeared at Marcus's door every morning at 7:30 with coffee and a plan for the day's work. Some days he stayed for an hour, showing Marcus a specific technique and then leaving him to practice it. Other days he stayed until dark, working alongside Marcus in a companionable silence, interrupted only by instruction or the occasional story from Sam's past that illuminated some principle of construction or survival. Marcus learned how to read a spirit level properly, how to account for seasonal wood movement, how to distinguish between structural issues that needed immediate attention and cosmetic problems that could wait. He learned that Sam had lost his son, James, in Iraq in 2004, a combat engineer who'd been 28 years old and planning to become a contractor when he got home. Sam mentioned it once while they were fitting insulation bats between wall studs and didn't elaborate. But Marcus understood that teaching someone else's son how to build was Sam's way of continuing a conversation that had been cut short, and he tried to be worthy of that trust. The work changed Marcus's body. His hands developed calluses in new places. His shoulders and back grew accustomed to the repetitive strain of lifting and positioning lumber. He lost 12 pounds without trying, the physical labor burning through calories faster than he could replace them on a budget that had shrunk to accommodate child support and rent on a structure most people wouldn't consider habitable. But the structure was becoming habitable. One sealed seam, one insulated wall, one corrected angle at a time. Emma's birthday was February 23rd. Marcus had been planning the gift since early January, sketching designs on the back of his legal pad during breaks, measuring and remeasuring the salvaged maple Sam had given him from his own workshop. "Been saving this piece for something that mattered," Sam had said, running his hand over the wood's tight grain. "Figure a man building something for his daughter qualifies." They built the bookshelf together over 4 evenings, Sam teaching Marcus mortise and tenon joinery, with a patience that suggested he understood the stakes involved were higher than furniture construction. "No screws, no nails in the frame," Sam explained, demonstrating how to cut the mortise with a chisel. "Just wood-fitting wood. This shelf will outlast both of us if you do it right." Marcus did it right. He cut each mortise carefully, testing the fit of each tenon until it slid home with the quiet friction of precision work. Sam showed him how to route the decorative pattern on the back panel, a simple leaf design Marcus had found in a library book on craftsman furniture. "Not too deep or you'll weaken it, just enough to catch light and show someone paid attention." When they finished, Marcus ran his hand over the assembled piece. 3 shelves, each one level and square, the joints tight, the routed pattern catching the workshop light exactly the way Sam said it would. It was the first thing Marcus had built from scratch, start to finish, that looked like it belonged in a real house instead of a structure held together by determination and salvaged materials. Sam stood back, arms crossed, examining the work with a critical eye that softened after a moment. "Your father would have been proud of that." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Sam's hands were shaking slightly when he reached out to steady the shelf for one final check. Marcus noticed but didn't comment. The older man had mentioned arthritis once, in passing, the way he mentioned most things about himself, as fact, not complaint. "You okay?" Sam lowered his hands, flexing his fingers. "My son was going to be a builder, like you. Commercial, residential, didn't matter. He just wanted to make things that would last." He paused, looking at the bookshelf with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "I never got to teach him joinery like this. He deployed 3 months after he finished his apprenticeship. Figured we'd have time when he got back." The workshop was quiet except for the small sounds of a building settling in winter cold. "I'm glad I got to teach you," Sam said, and there was something final in the way he said it, as though he were closing a ledger that had been open too long. Marcus delivered the bookshelf on the morning of Emma's birthday, arriving at Jennifer's house, the house that used to be his house, at 9 o'clock with the shelf wrapped in a moving blanket in the bed of his truck. Ryan Foster answered the door. He was exactly what Marcus expected. Well-dressed in casual clothes that looked expensive without being ostentatious, clean-shaven, with the kind of posture that suggested regular gym attendance, and a life free of manual labor's accumulated damage. "Marcus, come in." "I'm fine here. Is Emma around?" Ryan looked at the wrapped bundle in Marcus's arms. "Yeah, let me—" "Emma, your dad's here." Emma appeared behind Ryan, already dressed for her birthday, in a blue dress Marcus didn't recognize. When she saw the size of the package, her eyes widened with the specific mathematics of a child calculating gift potential. "You made that?" "Made it for your books." She pulled Marcus inside, regardless of his intention to stay on the porch, and Ryan stepped back to make room. The house smelled like cake and coffee and the accumulated warmth of a place where multiple people lived together without friction. Birthday decorations hung in the kitchen, streamers, a banner, evidence of a life being lived fully in ways Marcus was no longer part of. Connor sat at the kitchen table with a plate of eggs and toast, watching the scene with the careful neutrality he'd been practicing for months. Jennifer was at the stove, her back to the room, and she turned when Marcus entered. "Happy birthday, Emma," Marcus said, setting the shelf on the floor and unwrapping it. The maple caught the kitchen light, the grain running clean and straight across all 3 shelves, the routed leaf pattern on the back panel exactly prominent enough to be noticed without being showy. Emma knelt beside it, running her fingers over the wood with the reverence of someone who understood, even at 8 years old, that this object represented more than its function. "Did it take a long time?" "Couple weeks, off and on." She looked up at him with an expression that was doing complicated math about time and effort, and what it meant that her father had been working on this while living in whatever condition he was living in out there in the structure she'd never seen. "You were working on this at Christmas?" "Started it in January, but yeah, thinking about it at Christmas." Something shifted in her face, the moment when a child realizes that a gift costs someone something beyond money, and it changes the value of the thing entirely. Connor had stood up from the table and moved closer, still maintaining his careful distance, but unable to sustain complete disinterest. He touched the edge of one shelf, testing its stability with the unconscious evaluation of someone checking whether something was really as solid as it appeared. "You made this? Like with your hands?" "With Grandpa Sam's help." "Who's Grandpa Sam?" "A man teaching me what my father didn't have time to." Connor absorbed this, his face working through several expressions before settling back into neutral territory. But something had registered. Marcus could see it in the way Connor's fingers lingered on the shelf's corner, in the slight furrow between his eyebrows that meant he was processing information that didn't fit his existing frameworks. Ryan had moved closer, examining the joinery with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "This is professional work. The mortise and tenon construction, the grain alignment, someone knew what they were doing. Sam taught me. He's been building things for 50 years. Ryan nodded, and there was something in his expression that might have been respect or might have been the careful performance of respect. Marcus couldn't tell and wasn't sure it mattered. Emma had already picked up the shelf, refusing Marcus's offer of help, and was carrying it toward her room in 2 trips because it was heavier than she'd estimated. Connor watched her go, then looked back at Marcus with an expression that was struggling to maintain its defensive architecture. "You built this where you're living? In the shelter?" "Yeah." "Like, with what tools?" "Grandpa's tools, the ones from the craftsman box in our old garage." Connor's face shifted again. He'd been 4 when James Hayes died, too young for real memory, but the toolbox had been a presence in their family's life, something Marcus had kept visible but hadn't used until now. A fixed point in the garage that represented a past Connor knew about but hadn't experienced directly. The boy opened his mouth, closed it again, looked at his mother, then back at Marcus. "Okay," he said, and it wasn't nothing. It wasn't acceptance or forgiveness or even understanding, but it was acknowledgement. A small crack in the wall Connor had been building since Jennifer told him she was leaving Marcus for Ryan. Marcus left shortly after, declining Jennifer's polite offer of coffee, and sat in his truck in the driveway for a few minutes before starting the engine. He could see into the kitchen window from where he was parked, could see Connor standing near the table, looking in the direction of Emma's room, hands still in his pockets, but his posture slightly less rigid than it had been. The structure had changed again by the time Marcus got back. Not physically, Sam hadn't been there, but in Marcus's understanding of what he was building and why. Emma's bookshelf was in her room at Jennifer's house, but the room Marcus was going to build for her was in this structure, and the two things existed in parallel realities that didn't need to reconcile to both be true. He pulled out the legal pad and added a new item: frame Emma's room. Then he added another: start Connor's room. The second addition felt presumptuous, given that Connor had barely spoken to him in 3 months. But builders didn't wait for certainty before starting work. They built what was needed and trusted that eventually someone would need it. February gave way to March with the grudging reluctance of Alaska winter releasing its grip. The days grew longer by 6 minutes each day, a mathematical progression that felt more meaningful than it should. Marcus could now work until 5:30 before losing useful light, and the extra hour and a half translated to measurable progress on the interior wall that would divide the structure into 2 rooms. Sam helped him frame it, teaching Marcus how to find studs at 16 inches on center, how to account for door swing, how to run electrical through walls in ways that wouldn't violate code, even though no inspector was ever going to see this work. "Build it right anyway," Sam said, cutting a length of Romex with practiced efficiency. "Not because someone's checking, because you'll know if you didn't." They hung the door frame together, shimming it level and plumb despite the floor's subtle irregularities. Marcus had bought a pre-hung interior door at the salvage yard for $20. Solid wood, older than the structure itself, with brass hardware that just needed polishing to look respectable again. "What color for Emma's room?" Sam asked, measuring for outlet placement. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Sam the paint samples he'd photographed at the hardware store. 4 shades of blue ranging from pale gray blue to a richer cobalt. Asked Emma which one. She said the third from left. Sam studied the image. "Good eye. That'll catch light without overwhelming the space." They painted on a Saturday in mid-March when the temperature outside finally climbed above freezing for the first time since January. Marcus had spent 40 minutes at the paint counter choosing the exact shade, aware that this decision mattered in ways that transcended color theory. This was the first room he'd created from nothing, the first space he was building specifically for his daughter, and getting it right felt essential in a way he couldn't fully articulate. The blue went on lighter than it appeared in the can, which Sam had predicted. Always does. You'll want 2 coats to get the depth you're looking for. Marcus applied the second coat with more care than the first, using the technique Sam had demonstrated, cutting in the edges with a brush, then rolling the main surfaces with overlapping W patterns to avoid roller marks. The room transformed as he worked, the raw plywood walls disappearing under layers of intentional color, the space becoming something deliberate instead of accidental. When they finished and stepped back to evaluate the work, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A small expansion, like a hand unclenching. "She's going to love this," Sam said, and the certainty in his voice mattered more than Marcus would have admitted. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus built Emma's bed frame from the maple Sam had given him. It was simpler than the bookshelf: 4 posts, side rails, a headboard with a small integrated shelf for a glass of water or a book. No decorative routing this time, just clean lines and joints tight enough to hold without fasteners. Sam supervised the final assembly, offering small corrections to Marcus's technique, explaining why certain joints needed to be oriented in specific directions to handle the stress of a child climbing in and out of bed for the next decade. "You're building for her at 8, but she'll be 18 eventually. Build it to last that long." Marcus bought a desk from a thrift store, just a solid wood surface with drawers that stuck slightly but could be fixed with some sanding and wax. He stripped the old varnish, sanded it smooth, and refinished it with 3 coats of clear polyurethane that left the wood grain visible. Found a chair that matched well enough, reupholstered the seat with fabric Emma had picked out during their weekly visit, dark blue with small white stars. He made a mirror frame from pine, cutting it to size and mitering the corners with Sam's help, then hung it at the height Emma would need it in 2 years, accounting for growth. The room accumulated details: a small rug from the salvage yard, a lamp with a warm-toned bulb, curtains Jennifer had agreed to let Emma choose when Marcus explained what he was building. On the back of the door, Marcus hung a wooden sign he'd made from scrap pine, routing 2 simple letters into its surface: E.H. Emma Hayes. A declaration that this space belonged to someone, was made for someone, existed because someone had spent evenings after full days of work cutting and sanding and fitting pieces together with enough care to make them matter. March brought news that Marcus had been expecting without being prepared for. Jennifer called on a Sunday evening while Marcus was applying the final coat of polyurethane to Connor's desk, the companion piece to Emma's, built from the same salvaged maple, currently destined for a room that didn't exist yet but would. He saw her name on the screen and knew before answering that whatever she was calling to say would require him to sit down. "Marcus." "Hey." A pause long enough to be noticed. "I have something to tell you. Didn't want to do it by text." Marcus set down his brush and walked outside where the light was failing and the temperature was dropping and Copper was investigating something near the tree line. "Okay. Ryan's been offered a position in Denver, senior architect at a firm that's been courting him for 6 months. It's a significant opportunity." Marcus watched Copper nose through old snow, looking for whatever scent had caught his attention. "You're taking it. We're planning to move in August, after the school year. The kids. They'll come with us. We'd work out a visitation schedule. You'd have them summers and we can figure out holidays." The word summers landed with particular weight. Not custody, not shared time, not the fragile weekly visits that had become the architecture of Marcus's relationship with his children. Summers. 8 weeks a year. Christmas if schedules aligned. Spring break if flights could be coordinated. "I see. I know this is hard. I know what you've been doing with the structure. Emma talks about it constantly. Connor won't admit it, but he's curious. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter. But Denver is a good opportunity for Ryan, and for all of us. The schools are better. There's more opportunity. It's a fresh start." Marcus thought about the blue room with Emma's initial on the door. about Connor's desk drying in the workshop, waiting for a room that was still just framed studs and exposed insulation. About the legal pad with the list that was almost complete, about the structure that had been uninhabitable 4 months ago and was now something close to a home. Let me think about it. Of course. We don't have to decide details now. I just wanted you to know. After she hung up, Marcus stood on the porch watching Copper work his way along the fence line, systematic and thorough, operating according to protocols only he understood. The evening was cold, but not brutal, the light holding on longer each day, spring coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. Sam appeared at the end of the driveway making his evening walk, 3 miles every day, rain or snow or clear sky, the routine of someone who'd learned that movement was part of staying functional. He slowed when he saw Marcus on the porch, read something in Marcus's posture, and walked up the driveway instead of continuing past. Bad news? Jennifer's moving to Denver, taking Connor and Emma in August. Sam stood at the base of the porch steps, his breath visible in the cooling air. What does that mean for the house? The question was so direct, so focused on what could be controlled instead of what couldn't, that Marcus almost laughed. The house is still here. It always was. Sam said it without weight, without trying to make it profound, just a statement of fact that happened to contain more truth than the 3 words would suggest on their surface. In Vietnam, we built a bridge over the Song Bi River. Took us 6 weeks. Every day we were out there with concrete and rebar and the constant awareness that we might not be there tomorrow. Day we finally finished it, and I mean the same day, same afternoon, command tells us we're pulling out, leaving the bridge to the enemy. Sam looked up at the structure Marcus had been rebuilding for 4 months. My sergeant, guy named Alvarez from El Paso, he says, "Did we build that bridge for them? Or did we build it because we're builders?" Marcus let the story sit in the space between them. "Took me about 20 years to understand what he meant," Sam continued. "You don't build things to control what happens next. You build them because building is what you do." The bridge was still there after we left. Still crossed that river. Didn't matter who walked across it. Sam put one foot on the bottom porch step, testing it the way he always did, checking Marcus's work even in casual conversation. "You didn't build this house to keep them here, Marcus. You built it because you're your father's son, and a builder doesn't quit when the outcome changes." Marcus looked at the structure behind him. Walls that held heat now, windows that kept weather out, a roof that wasn't sagging under accumulated weight. 2 rooms inside, one finished blue, one still skeletal but framed and wired, and waiting for the drywall that would make it real. "The house is still here," Marcus said again, testing the phrase, finding it more solid each time he said it. "So are you." Sam continued his walk, and Marcus went back inside where Connor's desk was waiting for final assembly, and the list on the legal pad was down to 6 items, and the structure felt less like a shelter and more like something he'd chosen instead of something he'd ended up with by default. Connor called 3 days later. Marcus was in the workshop area, really just a corner of the main room where he'd set up a workbench from salvaged lumber, cutting wood for Connor's bed frame. He saw his son's name on the screen and had to sit down before answering. "Hey. Hey, bud." Sophie showed me the photos of her room and the rest of the house. Marcus waited, learning that sometimes silence was the most useful tool in a conversation. "Did you really do all that yourself?" "Grandpa Sam taught me. But yeah, I did the work. Like in the winter, when it was 20 below some days? Yeah." Connor was quiet for long enough that Marcus checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "That's kind of insane." The word choice was interesting. Not impressive, not cool, not any of the direct compliments a 13-year-old would resist giving his father. Insane. Which was a word that let Connor acknowledge something significant while maintaining emotional distance. "Kept me busy. Sophie said you built her a room, like a real room? Blue walls, bed frame, desk. There's a sign on the door with her initials. Did you? Connor stopped, started again. Do I have a room? The question came out carefully neutral, trying not to hope too obviously, trying to maintain the defensive posture that had become Connor's default setting around anything involving his father. Marcus looked at the framed wall that would become Connor's room, at the desk waiting for its final coat of finish, at the lumber cut and stacked for a bed frame that would be simpler than Emma's but built with the same attention to joints that would hold. I'm working on it. Something changed in the silence. Connor's breathing shifted slightly, became less guarded. What color? Thought you might want to pick. I've got samples if you want to see them when you visit. Can you send photos? Marcus took pictures of the 4 green paint samples he'd bought, ranging from gray-green to a cleaner medium green that looked like it knew what it was without pretending to be anything else. Sent them to Connor's number, a number he'd only recently gotten from Emma, because asking Jennifer still felt like admitting defeat in ways Marcus couldn't quite articulate. The response came back in 4 minutes. Third one from the left. Marcus looked at the sample. Sage Passage, according to the label, the kind of paint name someone at the company had thought very carefully about. It was the right green, clear and plain and not trying to be anything other than what it was. You got it. Come help me paint it when you visit? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Okay. 1 word. But it was the first time Connor had agreed to something involving the structure, the first crack in the wall between them that suggested maybe, eventually, there could be a door. Marcus bought 3 gallons of Sage Passage the next day and started painting Connor's room that evening, working by lamplight after the sun went down because waiting felt impossible now that momentum had shifted. The green went on smooth, covering the raw drywall Sam had helped Marcus hang the previous week. 2 coats to get the depth right, the color shifting slightly in different light, but always resolving to something steady. He built Connor's bed frame over 5 evenings, using the same mortise and tenon joinery Sam had taught him for Emma's shelf. The headboard was simple but solid, with clean lines that would work for a 13-year-old now and wouldn't feel childish when Connor was 20. Sam came by to check the work, running his hands over the joints, testing their tightness with the critical eye of someone who knew exactly how much stress a bed frame would endure over years of use. Your father would recognize this work, Sam said, and Marcus understood he meant it as the highest compliment Sam knew how to give. They assembled the frame in Connor's room, setting it against the north wall where morning light would come in at an angle instead of direct. Marcus had hung curtains Emma helped pick, solid dark green, heavy enough to block light for a teenage boy who'd want to sleep past dawn on weekends. On the back of the door, Marcus routed another sign, C.H. Connor Hayes, a room waiting for someone who might not use it for more than summers and holidays, but who would know, every time he saw it, that his father had built something specifically for him with enough care to make the details matter. April brought Emma for her first overnight visit. Jennifer had agreed to it after Emma asked, begged actually, according to the email Jennifer sent, and Marcus had cleaned the structure with more attention than he'd ever given to any living space in his life. Emma climbed out of Jennifer's car carrying a sleeping bag, a backpack, and a stuffed animal she was technically too old for but didn't care. She stood in what Marcus had started calling a yard, 2 acres where snow was melting to reveal actual ground, where grass would grow, where the fence line was visible for the first time since December. She looked at the structure, and Marcus watched her take inventory. Solid roof, clear windows, a small porch that looked like an entrance instead of an afterthought, paint that made the whole thing look like a decision instead of an emergency. You did all this? Most of it. She walked through the front door and Marcus let her explore without guidance, watching her touch the walls he'd built, open and close the kitchen cabinets Sam had helped him hang level, look out each window at slightly different views of the property. When she got to her room, she stopped in the doorway. The afternoon light was coming through the east window at exactly the angle Marcus had calculated when he positioned the bed frame. The room was the blue she'd chosen, the furniture he'd built waiting like it had always been there, the sign on the door declaring ownership in 2 simple letters. Emma didn't say anything for a long time. She walked in slowly, touching the bed frame, running her fingers over the routed EH on the door sign, sitting on the desk chair and spinning it slightly to test the swivel mechanism Marcus had repaired. "This is my room." It wasn't a question. It was confirmation of something she'd been told but needed to see to believe. "If you want it." She turned to look at him, her face working through several emotions at once: joy and sadness and something more complicated that didn't have a simple name. "Does Connor have a room?" "Next door, green walls. He picked the color." She processed this, understanding more than Marcus expected about what it meant that her brother had participated in the creation of his own space here. "Bo kom ba cook," she said quietly, then looked embarrassed. "My friend Lynn taught me. It's Vietnamese. It means Dad didn't give up." Marcus leaned against the door frame, feeling the weight of those 4 words in a language he didn't speak, but understood completely. "Your friend's right." Emma pulled out her phone. When had 8-year-olds started having phones, Marcus thought, before remembering that 8-year-olds with divorced parents needed ways to contact both parents, and took a series of photos. The room, the sign, the view from the window. She typed something and sent it before Marcus could ask who the recipient was. 3 minutes later, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "Okay, that's actually cool." 4 words. Not effusive, not unconditional approval, but acknowledgement. Connor had looked at photographic evidence of the work Marcus had done and found it worthy of a response that wasn't hostile or dismissive. Marcus typed back, "Your room's ready when you are." The 3 dots appeared. This time they didn't disappear. "Can I come see it? Before we move?" "Yes. Anytime. Maybe next weekend?" Marcus looked at Emma, who was arranging her stuffed animals on the bed frame he'd built with Sam's patient instruction, in the room he'd created from studs and drywall and a shade of blue carefully chosen to catch light without overwhelming the space. Definitely. That night, after Emma was asleep in her room and Copper was snoring softly by the stove, and the structure was holding heat the way it was finally designed to do, Marcus sat at the small table he'd built from salvaged lumber and looked at his legal pad. 6 items left: window trim, exterior paint finish, front steps permanent installation, kitchen counter tile, bathroom rough-in, deck framing. He'd started with 32 items in December, crossed off 26 in 4 months. The structure had gone from uninhabitable to functional to something that was beginning to resemble the word home without embarrassment. Marcus added a new item at the bottom: teach Connor to use the tools. Then he set down the pen and walked outside, where the April evening was cold but not brutal, where stars were visible between passing clouds, where the work he'd done was visible in straight lines and level surfaces and rooms that existed because he'd decided they should. Sam walked past on his evening route and raised a hand without stopping. Marcus raised his back. Their established communication for "everything's fine," which was distinct from their communication for "come have coffee," which involved a wave and a gesture toward the porch. Everything was fine, not perfect, not resolved, not anything like the life Marcus had expected to be living at 39, but fine in the way that mattered: forward motion, progress measured in crossed-off items, and children who were beginning to believe their father when he made promises about rooms and colors and being there when they needed him. The house was still here. So was Marcus. And in 8 days, Connor would be here too, seeing for the first time what his father had built when everything fell apart, and the only choice was to build something new or surrender to the wreckage. Marcus went back inside, where Emma was sleeping in a bed he'd made with his own hands, in a room that would be here whether she lived in it full-time or just visited, because builders didn't build things to control outcomes. They built them because building was what they did, and what they built lasted regardless of who walked through the door, or how often, or for how long. The work was the answer. Marcus's father had been right about that, and now Marcus was learning to be right about it too. Connor arrived on a Saturday morning in late April with a backpack and an expression that was trying very hard to look like he didn't care about any of this. Jennifer dropped him off without getting out of the car, her wave through the windshield brief and functional, and Marcus watched his son walk up the driveway with the particular gait of a 13-year-old who hasn't quite figured out what to do with limbs that keep getting longer. "Hey, bud." "Hey." Connor stopped a few feet from the porch, taking in the structure with an evaluation Marcus could feel even without seeing his son's face clearly. The boy's eyes moved across the roofline, the windows, the painted exterior, cataloging changes from whatever image he'd constructed in his mind based on Emma's photos and his own assumptions about where his father had ended up. "It's bigger than I thought. 2 rooms inside now, yours and Emma's. Want to see?" Connor nodded and followed Marcus through the front door. Copper appeared from the back corner where he'd been sleeping and approached Connor with the cautious optimism of a dog who remembered this person, but wasn't sure if the relationship still existed. Connor knelt and scratched behind Copper's ears, his face relaxing into something closer to the boy Marcus remembered from before the separation. "He looks good. Gets more walks out here than he did in the city." Connor stood, and Marcus watched him absorb the interior, the insulated walls, the functional stove that was actually heating the space, the kitchen area with its salvaged cabinets and counters that were level, the workbench in the corner with tools laid out in organized rows. "You really did all this?" "Grandpa Sam taught me, but yeah." Connor walked to the workbench and picked up the hand plane, turning it over in his hands with the careful attention of someone examining an artifact from a museum. "This was Grandpa Hayes's?" "Yeah. Your grandfather kept it sharp. I'm trying to maintain that tradition." Connor set it down exactly where he'd found it, that small gesture of respect landing somewhere in Marcus's chest with more weight than it should have carried. "Can I see my room?" Marcus led him to the door with CH routed into the pine sign hanging on its back. Connor pushed it open and stood in the doorway the same way Emma had, taking inventory in silence. The green walls caught the morning light coming through the window. The bed frame sat solid against the north wall. The desk Marcus had built and refinished waited with the chair Emma had helped choose fabric for, matching Connor's but in darker tones. Connor walked in slowly. He sat on the bed, testing its stability with small bounces. He opened and closed the desk drawers, each one moving smoothly on the tracks Marcus had spent an evening adjusting until they were perfect. He looked at the CH sign on the back of the door for a long time. "You built all the furniture?" "Sam taught me joinery, mortise and tenon mostly. No screws in the frames, just wood-fitting wood." Connor touched the corner of the desk where the joint was visible if you knew to look for it. "Why?" The question was broad enough to mean several things. Marcus chose to answer the version he thought Connor was actually asking. "Because you're my son, and you deserve a room that was made for you. Not just assembled from whatever was cheapest or easiest. Made." Connor's face worked through several expressions before settling on something that looked like he was trying not to cry and mostly succeeding. "We're moving to Denver in August." "I know. So I won't even be here most of the time." "I know that too." Connor looked at Marcus with confusion that was genuine, unguarded in a way he hadn't been since the separation. "Then why did you build it?" Marcus sat on the desk chair, giving Connor space to process without feeling cornered. "Because the room isn't about how often you're here. It's about you having a place that's yours, that was built because I wanted you to have it. You can be in Denver and know this room exists. That matters." Connor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the property where snow had given way to mud and the first suggestions of grass, where the fence line was visible and Copper was investigating something near the tree line. "Mom says you lived here all winter, like when it was really cold." "Yeah, that's kind of insane." There was that word again, the one Connor used when he was impressed but unwilling to say so directly. "Had to be somewhere. Figured I'd make it somewhere worth being." Connor turned from the window, his expression shifting into something more complicated. "Dad?" It was the first time Connor had called him that in 4 months. The word landed in the space between them with the weight of a peace offering, tentative but real. Yeah? Why didn't you fight Mom in court? For custody? The question had been coming. Marcus had known it was coming since the divorce was finalized, but hearing it asked directly still required him to find honesty. He wasn't sure he'd assembled correctly yet. Because I didn't have anything to fight with. No job, no place to live that a judge would consider appropriate for kids. No resources to hire lawyers who could compete with your mom's attorney. But you have something now. Marcus looked at his son standing in a room Marcus had built from studs and drywall and careful attention to level surfaces. Yeah, I do. Connor sat back down on the bed, his hands clasped between his knees. Ryan tried to teach me to use power tools once. In his garage. I couldn't get the drill to go straight and he got impatient and just took it from me. He said it without drama, just reporting a fact, but Marcus understood the weight of it, the small moment of inadequacy that had settled into Connor's understanding of himself as someone who couldn't learn mechanical things, who wasn't good with his hands, who would always disappoint people who tried to teach him. Sam's been teaching me for 4 months and I still mess things up regularly. That's how learning works. He doesn't get mad. He corrects me, shows me the right way, lets me try again. That's what teaching is supposed to look like. Connor processed this, his face working through calculations Marcus couldn't quite follow. Could you teach me? How to use Grandpa's tools? That's why I built you a workbench. Connor looked up sharply. What? Marcus stood and walked to the main room, Connor following. In the corner opposite Marcus's workbench was a smaller version, 3 feet long instead of 6, lower height to account for Connor's current stature, with a vise mounted on one end and a pegboard on the wall behind it holding tools sized for smaller hands. Sam helped me build it last week. Figured if you were going to learn, you needed your own workspace. Connor approached the bench like it might disappear if he moved too quickly. He touched the vise, opened and closed it, testing the mechanism. He took down a small handsaw and examined it with the careful attention of someone holding something valuable. These are for me? They're yours. Some I bought new, some Sam had extras of. The saw was your grandfather's. He had 2, and I've been holding on to the second one for when it was needed. Connor held the saw with both hands, running his thumb along the blade carefully enough not to cut himself, but firmly enough to feel the teeth. When can we start? Right now if you want. They spent the morning working on a simple project, a small box with a hinged lid that would teach Connor basic measurements, cutting and joining without being so complex that failure would feel catastrophic. Sam appeared around 10 with coffee and sandwiches and spent an hour showing Connor how to mark measurements accurately, how to hold the saw at the right angle, how to let the tool do the work instead of forcing it. Your grandfather had good hands, Sam told Connor, watching the boy make his first cut with concentration that bordered on painful. Your father's learning to have good hands too. You're 3rd generation. That matters. Connor finished the cut, not perfectly straight but functional, and looked up at Sam with an expression that suggested he understood he was being given something more valuable than carpentry instruction. They broke for lunch and sat on the porch eating the sandwiches Sam had brought, watching clouds move across the sky that was finally more blue than gray, watching the world remember what spring was supposed to look like. Grandpa Sam, Connor said, testing the name carefully. Were you in the military? Army. Combat engineer. Vietnam, 70 to 71. What's a combat engineer? Someone who builds things and blows things up, depending on what the mission needs. Mostly I built bunkers, bridges, landing zones, tried to keep people alive by making the structures around them sound. Connor absorbed this, his sandwich forgotten halfway to his mouth. Is that why you know how to build houses? Part of it. Learned the basics in the Army. Learned the rest over 50 years of making mistakes and fixing them. Do you have kids? Sam's face shifted almost imperceptibly, and Marcus saw him make a decision about how much truth to share with the 13-year-old he'd just met. Had a son, James. He was a combat engineer too. Died in Iraq in 2004. Connor went very still, the way children do when they realize they've stepped into territory that's more serious than they anticipated. I'm sorry. Me too. He was going to be a builder when he got home. Like your dad. Like you're learning to be. Sam stood and collected the sandwich wrappers, giving Connor space to process. And Marcus watched his son sit with the information that the man teaching him carpentry had lost his own son, and that teaching Connor was Sam's way of continuing a conversation that had been interrupted by an IED on a road outside Baghdad. They worked until mid-afternoon, Connor's box taking shape slowly but steadily under Sam's patient guidance. When Jennifer came to pick Connor up at 4, the boy had a functional box with a lid that closed properly and joints that were tight enough to hold without fasteners, and the pride on his face was something Marcus hadn't seen since before the divorce. I made this, Connor said, showing Jennifer the box through the car window. It's beautiful. Dad and Grandpa Sam taught me. Jennifer's eyes met Marcus's over Connor's head, and something passed between them that wasn't reconciliation, but was acknowledgement. A small recognition that Marcus had done something right, had given their son something that mattered. Connor hugged Marcus before getting in the car, a quick embrace that was over almost before Marcus could register it was happening, and then the Honda was pulling away down the driveway, and Marcus was standing on the porch with Sam watching the dust settle. He's a good kid, Sam said. Yeah. You're doing right by him. Trying. They stood in silence for a while, watching the afternoon light change angles, listening to the sounds of a property coming back to life after winter's dormancy. I have something for you, Sam said, breaking the quiet. Come by tomorrow morning. Marcus arrived at Sam's house at 8, pulling up to a structure that looked like it had been built by someone who understood exactly what they were doing and had the time to do it right. 2 stories, cedar siding weathered to silver gray, a workshop out back that was larger than Marcus's entire living space. Sam met him at the door with coffee already poured and led him to the workshop. The space smelled like sawdust and machine oil and the accumulated time of someone who'd spent decades working with wood. Tools hung on every wall in organized rows. A table saw sat in the center, its surface clean and maintained. Lumber was stacked along one wall in precise rows, sorted by species and dimension. Sam walked to a workbench and picked up a wooden box that was clearly old, clearly valuable, clearly something that had been cared for across generations. My father brought these from Sweden in 1923. He was a furniture maker in Gothenburg, came to Minnesota with his tools, and not much else. Sam opened the box. Inside was a complete set of chisels, their handles worn smooth from decades of use, their blades still sharp and clean. Files, calipers, a marking gauge, a dovetail saw, the accumulated tools of someone who'd made fine things and maintained the instruments that made those things possible. I gave these to my son before he deployed. They came back to me in a box with his personal effects. Sam's hands weren't shaking, but they were moving with the careful deliberation of someone handling something that carried weight beyond its physical mass. I want you to have them. Marcus felt the words land somewhere in his chest that made breathing more difficult than it should have been. Sam, I can't. You can. You'll teach Connor. Connor will teach his kids. That's what tools are for, passing down. They don't do anyone any good sitting in my workshop waiting for someone who's never coming home. Marcus looked at the box, at the tools that had crossed an ocean and survived a war and come home without the person who'd carried them. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Marcus took the box, feeling its weight, understanding that he was being given more than chisels and files. He was being given a lineage, a connection to Sam's father and Sam's son, and now to Marcus and Connor, all of them linked by the simple act of making things with careful attention and passing down the knowledge of how to do it right. Inside the box lid, carved in neat letters, James Samuel Brennan, 1976 to 2004. Marcus traced the letters with his finger, feeling the grooves where someone had cut them into wood with the intention that they would last, that they would mean something beyond the name itself. "Thank you." Sam nodded, looking at the box in Marcus's hands with an expression that was equal parts sorrow and satisfaction. "Teach your boy well. That's the only thanks I need." May brought warmth that felt like permission to believe winter was actually over. The property transformed as mud gave way to grass, as bare branches remembered they were supposed to produce leaves, as the world returned to color after months of monochrome. Marcus planted a garden along the south fence, tomatoes, kale, herbs, with seeds Sam provided, and instructions that were detailed enough to give Marcus a fighting chance of not killing everything through ignorance. Connor came every weekend, taking the bus from Anchorage on Saturday mornings and getting picked up Sunday afternoons. They established a routine: breakfast together, then work on whatever project Connor was learning. Dovetail joints, mortise and tenon, proper sharpening technique with the stones Sam had given them. Lunch on the porch. Afternoon working on the structure itself, Connor helping with tasks that were within his skill level, watching Marcus handle the ones that weren't, asking questions that got more sophisticated each week. Emma came for overnights twice in May, bringing friends once to show them the room her father had built, and Marcus understood from the pride in her voice when she gave them the tour that the room meant something beyond its function as a place to sleep. The list on the legal pad dwindled. Window trim, done. Exterior paint finish, done. Front steps, permanent installation, done with Connor's help, the boy learning how to mix concrete and set posts level. Kitchen counter tile, done, each piece cut and placed with attention to spacing and level. Bathroom rough-in, done, the plumbing functional if not elegant. Only one item remained: deck framing. Marcus had been planning it since March, a small deck off the front porch, 8 by 12, elevated 2 feet off the ground, with stairs leading down to what would eventually be a proper walkway to the driveway. It was the last major project, the final piece that would make the structure feel complete instead of perpetually in progress. Sam helped him design it, sketching the framing plan on the back of an envelope while they drank coffee on the porch one morning in late May. Pressure-treated posts set in concrete below frost line, joists at 16 inches on center, decking boards with proper spacing for drainage. You build it right, it'll last 30 years. They started framing on a Saturday in early June with Connor helping, the boy now comfortable enough with tools to be genuinely useful instead of just observing. They dug post holes with an auger Sam loaned them, mixed concrete in a wheelbarrow, set posts and checked them for plumb in 2 directions. Connor worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd discovered he was good at something he hadn't known he could do, asking questions about why certain measurements mattered, why posts needed to be exactly vertical, why the spacing between joists was calculated the way it was. "It's all load distribution," Marcus explained, showing Connor how weight would transfer through the deck boards to the joists, to the posts, to the ground. Build it right and it holds everything. Build it wrong and eventually it fails. Like the roof you fixed first? Exactly like that. They worked through the morning, breaking for lunch that Connor had helped prepare. Sandwiches assembled with the same attention to getting things right that he was applying to carpentry. When they went back to work, Connor took on more complex tasks, cutting joists to length with the circular saw under Marcus's supervision, drilling pilot holes for lag bolts, learning that precision mattered more than speed. Sam appeared in the afternoon with a cooler of lemonade and spent an hour checking their work, offering small corrections, nodding approval when things were done correctly. "You're teaching him well," Sam told Marcus while Connor was measuring the next joist. "He's a good student. He's his father's son, that's what he is." By the end of the weekend, the frame was complete, posts set solid, joists level and square, the structure ready for decking boards that Marcus would install over the following week. Connor stood back and looked at what they'd built with an expression that Marcus recognized from his own face in the bathroom mirror lately, the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd made something real with their hands and knew it would last. When I come back next weekend, can we start the railing? Connor asked while waiting for Jennifer to pick him up. Yeah, we'll do the decking during the week, railing next Saturday. Connor nodded, shouldering his backpack with the casual ease of someone who'd made this transition enough times that it was becoming normal. Dad? Yeah? When we move to Denver, can I still come up in the summer? To help with projects? The question carried more weight than its simple phrasing suggested, and Marcus felt the full significance of it settle in his chest. You can come up whenever you want. Summer, holidays, whenever. There'll always be projects. And even when there aren't projects, you're still welcome. Connor hugged him, less tentative than the first time, more certain about where his arms went and how long to hold on. I told Ryan I wanted to learn carpentry. He said he'd hire someone to teach me in Denver. Marcus waited, understanding there was more coming. I told him I wanted you to teach me, that it mattered that it was you. Jennifer's car appeared at the end of the driveway before Marcus could respond, and Connor was gone with a wave that was more cheerful than any wave Marcus had received from his son in the past 6 months. Sam materialized from wherever he'd been working in his own yard and walked up the driveway with the slow deliberation of someone whose joints required negotiation to function properly. Heard that last bit? Yeah. You're doing good work with that boy. Trying to make up for lost time. No such thing as lost time. There's only the time you have and what you do with it. They stood looking at the deck frame, at the structure beyond it that had been uninhabitable 6 months ago and was now unrecognizable from what Marcus had found in December. I built my house in '78, Sam said, his eyes on the structure but his mind somewhere else. Took me 2 summers. My wife thought I was crazy, spending every evening and weekend working instead of relaxing. She didn't understand that the work was the relaxation. He paused, hands in his pockets, posture slightly stooped in the way of men who'd spent too many years carrying heavy things. She left in '82, took our daughter, said I loved the house more than I loved them. Marcus hadn't known Sam had a daughter. The revelation shifted his understanding of the older man in ways he was still processing. Do you see her? Christmas cards, the occasional phone call. She lives in Oregon, has her own family now. I'm someone she used to know. Sam looked at Marcus with eyes that had learned things the hard way and were offering those lessons without requiring Marcus to make the same mistakes. I built that house for them. That was the mistake. When they left, the house felt like evidence of failure instead of evidence of effort. He gestured at Marcus's structure. You built this for you. For your ability to survive and rebuild and prove to yourself you weren't broken. The rooms you made for your kids are part of that, but they're not the foundation. You are. That's the difference. Marcus absorbed this, understanding that Sam was giving him permission to claim the work as his own instead of just in service of bringing his family back together. The house is still here, Marcus said, repeating the phrase that had become something like a mantra. So are you. That's what matters. June accelerated toward August with the particular velocity of time that knows something is ending. Connor came every weekend, his projects getting more ambitious as his skills improved. He built a small bookshelf for his room using the dovetail joints Sam had taught him, each pin and tail cut carefully and fitted with the patience of someone who'd learned that rushing produced mistakes that couldn't be fixed. Emma came for a week in July, bringing a friend whose parents were going through their own divorce, and Marcus watched the 2 girls treat his structure like a normal house where normal sleepovers happened, their laughter carrying through walls that held heat and kept out weather and proved that broken things could be made functional again with enough attention and effort. Jennifer called in late July to finalize the visitation schedule. 8 weeks in summer, alternating Christmas and Thanksgiving, spring break if schedules aligned. The conversation was civil, almost friendly, 2 people who'd been married for 11 years figuring out how to co-parent across 1,500 miles with the same attention to detail they'd once applied to choosing paint colors and schools. The kids are excited about their rooms, Jennifer said, and there was something in her voice that might have been approval or might have been recognition that Marcus had done something right, even if it hadn't saved the marriage. They should be. They're good rooms. Connor talks about carpentry constantly. Ryan's impressed with how much he's learned. Marcus felt the small victory of having given his son something Ryan couldn't compete with, then felt guilty for feeling victorious, then decided both feelings could exist simultaneously without canceling each other out. He's a good student. He says you're a good teacher. The compliment landed with more weight than Jennifer probably intended, and Marcus held on to it after they hung up, turning it over in his mind like one of the smooth stones from Sam's sharpening collection. The deck was finished on the first weekend in August, with Connor installing the final board, cutting it to length himself with the circular saw, checking his measurement 3 times before making the cut, placing it with the satisfaction of someone completing a project they'd started weeks ago. They stood on the completed deck, 8 by 12, solid as bedrock, level in all directions, with a railing that met code even though no inspector would ever check it, and Marcus felt the particular pride of having built something permanent with his son's help. "We made this," Connor said, his voice carrying the wonder of someone still adjusting to their own capabilities. "Yeah, we did." Sam appeared with a camera, an actual camera, not a phone, and took their picture standing on the deck with Copper between them, all 3 of them squinting slightly in the afternoon sun. "You'll want this someday," Sam said, and Marcus understood he meant decades from now, when Connor was showing his own children what he'd built with his father the summer he was 13. The night before Connor left for Denver, they had dinner on the completed deck. Burgers from the grill Marcus had bought used, corn from the garden that had somehow survived Marcus's amateur farming, lemonade Emma had made too sweet, but no one complained about. The evening was warm enough to sit outside without jackets, the light holding on until almost 10 o'clock. The sky doing that thing Alaska skies do in summer, where they never quite commit to darkness. Connor had been quiet through most of dinner, pushing food around his plate with the distracted attention of someone working up to saying something difficult. "I don't want to move." Emma looked at her brother with the particular concern of a younger sibling who'd learned to read moods. "Me neither." Marcus set down his burger and gave them both his full attention. "I know, and I wish you didn't have to, but Denver's going to be good for you. Better schools, more opportunities. Your mom and Ryan have a solid plan. But we won't see you. You'll see me summers and holidays, and any time you want to come up we'll figure it out. The rooms will be here. I'll be here." Connor looked at his father with an expression that was trying very hard not to cry. "What if we forget how to do this? The building stuff, the projects." Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app where he'd been keeping a list. "I've been thinking about that. Got about 15 projects lined up for next summer. Pergola over the deck, proper workshop building out back, fence repair and painting, garden expansion. Every one of them needs 2 people to do right." He showed Connor the list, watching his son's face shift from sadness to interest as he read through the projects. "I could really help with these?" "I'm counting on you helping. Some of them I can't do alone." Emma leaned over to look at the list. "What about me?" "You're in charge of garden planning and interior design consultation. Someone needs to tell me what colors work where, and your taste is better than mine." She smiled, the specific smile of someone who's been given a role they didn't know they wanted until it was offered. They sat on the deck until the light finally faded and the mosquitoes became aggressive enough to drive them inside, and Marcus tucked both kids into beds he'd built in rooms he'd created specifically for them, in a structure he'd saved from collapse through 6 months of daily work that had saved him from collapse in the process. The last item on the legal pad got crossed off in mid-August. Deck framing, complete. Marcus looked at the empty list, at the 32 crossed-off items that represented 6 months of learning and building and transforming something broken into something functional. He tore off the page and put it in a drawer, then started a new list. Summer projects. Year 2. Sam came by on the afternoon Connor and Emma left for Denver, finding Marcus sitting on the finished deck with Copper, watching clouds move across a sky that was starting to hint at the coming transition from summer to fall. "How you doing?" "Better than I thought I would be." Sam sat down on the deck, his joints creaking but managing the descent without assistance. "You built something good here." Marcus looked at the structure, painted and sealed and weather-tight, with rooms that held heat and windows that kept out cold, and a roof that would shed snow instead of collecting it. "We built something good here. Couldn't have done it without you. You'd have figured it out eventually. I just saved you some trial and error." "You saved me more than that." Sam was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the tree line where Copper had found something worth investigating. "Teaching you was the closest I've felt to my son in 15 years, so it went both ways." They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the property settling into late afternoon, watching the light change angles. "You going to be okay out here alone?" "I've been alone before. This time I've got better infrastructure." Sam smiled, a small expression that carried more warmth than his usual economy of emotion typically allowed. "You know where I am if you need anything." "I do." After Sam left, Marcus walked through the structure alone, taking inventory. Emma's room with its blue walls and carefully built furniture. Connor's room with its green walls and the shelf Connor had built himself sitting on the desk Marcus had made. The main room with its functional kitchen and the stove that kept everything warm, and the workbench where he'd learned skills his father had died before teaching him. Outside, the deck they'd built together, the garden producing vegetables despite Marcus's inexperience, the fence line visible and maintained, the roof solid overhead. The structure wasn't what he'd imagined his life would look like at 39. It wasn't the house in Anchorage with the family intact and the children sleeping in rooms down the hall every night. It wasn't the career in structural engineering or the marriage that had lasted, or any of the futures he'd sketched out in his 20s when the path forward seemed clear and linear. But it was his. Built with his hands and his father's tools and Sam's patient instruction, made from salvaged lumber and careful measurements and the decision to stay instead of surrender. Marcus's phone buzzed. Email from Connor. Subject: project idea. "Dad, what if we built a treehouse next summer? There's that big spruce near the back fence that looks perfect. I've been researching treehouse construction and I think we could do it. Let me know what you think." Connor. Marcus looked at the spruce Connor meant. Massive, ancient, with branches that started 15 feet up and spread wide enough to support a platform with room for walls and a roof and whatever else they decided to include. He typed back, "Good idea. Start planning it. We'll need engineering calculations for the load-bearing branches. You handle the research, I'll handle the permits." 3 dots appeared immediately. Connor. "There are permits for tree houses?" Marcus. "Probably not. But we're going to build it right anyway." Connor. "Because you'll know if we didn't." Marcus. "Exactly." He set down the phone and looked at the property again, seeing it differently now. Not as the wreckage of a previous life, but as the foundation of a new one. Not the place he'd ended up by default, but the place he'd chosen to build something lasting. The house was still here. So was Marcus. And next summer, Connor would be here too, learning to calculate load ratios and cut lumber at angles and build something that would outlast both of them, because that's what builders did. They made things that lasted longer than the moments that broke them, that stood solid through seasons of change, that proved the work itself was the answer to questions about purpose and meaning and whether anything you did mattered beyond the doing of it. Marcus had been wrong about almost everything in the past year. Wrong about the marriage lasting, wrong about keeping his job, wrong about the future looking anything like he'd planned. But he'd been right about this, that a man with tools and time and the willingness to learn could take something broken and make it whole again, that the work itself had value independent of outcomes. That building was what you did when everything fell apart, because building was how you put yourself back together piece by piece, board by board, one crossed-off item on a legal pad at a time. The work was the answer. His father had known it. Sam had proven it. Marcus had learned it the hard way, in the cold, in the dark, in the moments when quitting would have been easier than continuing. Now Connor was learning it too. And that mattered more than anything else Marcus had managed to accomplish in 39 years of getting most things wrong and this one thing right. The light was fading, the way it did faster each day now that August was giving way to September. Marcus stood on the deck he'd built with his son and called Copper in from his investigation of whatever scent had caught his attention near the fence line. Inside, the stove needed feeding. The garden needed watering. Tomorrow he'd start on the pergola framing because there was always another project, always another broken thing waiting to be fixed or empty space waiting to be filled with something made by hands that had learned what they were capable of when failure wasn't an option and surrender wasn't a choice. The house was still here. Marcus was still here. And the work continued, one board at a time, one season after another, building something that would last.